Welcome to the FleetConvos podcast. I'm your host, Sean Lydon. I'm an independent journalist who has covered the fleet industry for over 15 years, and I started this podcast because I spent a lot of time talking with smart people about the future of transportation and fleet management, and I wanted to be able to share some of those conversations with you. So in this episode, I talk with Karl Popham, Manager of Electric Vehicles and Emerging Technologies at Austin Energy, a public power utility and a department of the city of Austin, Texas. With COVID-19 shutdowns and historically low fuel prices, what has been the impact on the demand for electric vehicles? Will the market stall, or will growth continue? Popham peers into his crystal ball and shares his outlook with us on this episode of the FleetConvos. Been a couple of years since we talked, so I wanted to make sure I've got the right context of, you know, what you're doing now and so forth. So your official title right now is
Manager of Electric Vehicles and Emerging Technologies at Austin Energy.
And if I understand correctly, you tend to be customer facing. So you're out in the community talking about the opportunities and advantages and so forth about how to deploy electric vehicles, whether in their fleet or personally. Kind of walk me through what your role is.
Certainly. So we have a very mature program. Mm-hmm. We launched this team back in 2011. So I had the opportunity to co-found the team. So really understand kind of the history and the strategy and where we've been going. And I do believe I have the best job at Austin Energy. It's a lot of fun. So what involves on the electric vehicle side is programs or really anything that can help reduce barriers to the adoption of electric vehicles, transportation electrification. We have about 34 initiatives in the portfolio spread over 10 value streams. So they have the typical electric vehicle infrastructure. That we have marketing and outreach campaigns. We have an auto dealership project with backing from a Bloomberg grant. We have vehicle to grid as part of our grid integration efforts as part of a larger Austin Shines project. And then, the fleet, we support the citywide fleet electrification program. So we'll talk, focus more on fleets. We have an active project with Cap Metro, our local transit authority, to electrify their buses. Let's see on the fleet side. And we've also had quite a few discussions with TNCs and, gig economy drivers, research and outreach to electrify, really anything that's high vehicle miles traveled. We're kind of interested in how we can electrify that.
Now, you said TNC?
Yeah, Uber and Lyft, transportation network companies.
Got it.
But to broaden it, gig economy. And so we did some research with Rocky Mountain Institute and how much a typical Uber driver could save in Austin. And their findings showed in Austin, they could pocket or avoid $5,500 per year in expenses versus the typical gas vehicles Uber drivers were doing. So really just, we have a low income program as well. We have a training
income program. So making electric vehicles more affordable to those in the low income bracket.
Walk you through that and what does that mean? Yeah, well, we're starting to see a pretty healthy used car market, and people are getting these very dependable low miles vehicles. Mm-hmm. And so one is just outreach campaigns, ride and drives, targeted demographic, marketing for all of our citizens to include low to moderate income. That these vehicles can be for you too. It also includes some targeted stuff with low-income communities to do electric ride share, to include electric bikes, charging stations at their low-income community. Okay. And so we're working with a few folks around that. It was also part of the umbrella of our EVs for schools. So that's really is for everyone, 4th through 12. But our 4 pilot schools we launched it in, we chose schools that had a very high percentage of population from low income families who actually attend those schools, to really double down and to make the technology accessible. And it's just not for rich people. I understand it too. Go home, have the conversations, just to try to do that generational shift as well.
Got it. So you're building awareness at all spectrums of the socioeconomic spectrum now. So if I understand correctly, you're speaking then to both the community on a kind of residential consumer side, and then you're also speaking to fleets as well on the commercial side. Is that correct?
Correct.
Programs are developed. Now, you may not be able to speak on Austin Energy's fleet because you're not in the fleet management department there, but is there anything that you can say about what Austin Energy is doing, with your own fleet in terms of electrification?
Certainly. So as part of a larger city effort, our current electrification plan for the city is 331 electric vehicles over a 2.5-year period. We're about year 1.5. We're a little over 150 right now. So that includes approximately 40 EVs at the utility as a city department. So we have quite a few plug-in and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. My team's city vehicle is a Bolt. So we have Bolts in service, but working with our city fleet services professionals, we're the ones providing the infrastructure for the charging stations and helping them with that aspect of it. So we have quite a few projects underway. Even this week, there's some new ones that's been installed. So it's ongoing and working very closely because it's a little new technology. It's a little different, and also trying to get the timing just right. You don't want the stations to arrive too early. You definitely don't want them late, and really get streamlining the process to have really a just-in-time implementation of these charging stations as the vehicles start to roll out. But they've been rolled out to include the fire department. Our transportation department is heavily users of them. Parking enforcement is 100% or pretty close to 100% EVs for their parking enforcement group. And then just a lot of the senior leadership, their vehicles are EVs just for their fleet needs.
Now, if I understand correctly, then Austin Energy's fleet is part of the overall city fleet. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a hybrid approach. We do have our own fleet folks, but correct. A lot of the maintenance and management is part of, they just changed their department name. I still call them City Fleet Services. My colleague Jennifer over there is a City Fleet Services officer, but they just did a branding change, and I forget what they're called now, City Mobility Services or something. Sure. But yeah, so our fleet professionals work with the city fleet professionals on procurement and whatnot. But yeah, we are part of a larger city fleet. And so city council did pass some specific resolutions for fleet electrification for the city. And that breakdown does include Austin Energy. So we get a lot of support from our board, our governing board, which is city council. Being a city-owned utility is kind of how that works. City council also has passed several electrification resolutions to include specific on community EVs. It's a big topic, and a separate working group is part of our update to our community-wide net zero planning, transportation electrification. It's part of the led by Austin Transportation Department, the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan. And then we also have a smart mobility roadmap, which is a vision for shared electric autonomous vehicles as a major mobility choice here in Austin. So a lot really going on in this space.
Absolutely. And just as a frame of reference, the 331 vehicles that are EVs in the city fleet, about what percentage of the total fleet is that?
Well, so that's the goal. I'd have to pull up the numbers, but we're probably at around 150 now. Basically 100 a year is kind of the procurement rate.
Got it. Okay.
This number was done with a methodology and support from a group called the Electrification Coalition, and it's called the Rapid Fleet Assessment, which if you are a fleet owner and operator, you're looking at a really quick down and dirty to get a realistic look at your fleet and how quickly you can electrify, what makes sense based on mileage and natural termination cycles. I think they're a pretty good group to work with, Electrification Coalition. To put that number in perspective, so it's really out of a population. So that RFA was done with a focus on sedans. And the sedan population was probably right around 1,000, 1,100. So 330, it's about a third of our sedan fleet. The actual number of assets City Fleet Services has is close to 5,000, and that's trailers and that's, waste trucks and buses and all kinds of stuff. But when we did the RFA, the Rapid Fleet Assessment, trucks and SUVs weren't on the roadmap yet. And so we're already, now that we're seeing those starting to roll in, we're very interested in that. And we've already started, even though they weren't, officially part of the plan, I've already started rolling in some plug-in hybrid electric SUVs into the fleet as some of the Chevy Tahoes are rolling out. They're getting replaced with plug-in hybrid EVs.
Okay, so then the 331 number, that's a target number, and that's by when? So you started the program about a year and a half ago, and when are you looking to achieve that?
We're about a year away, and the City Fleet Services, who does manage that plan, did report to Council that they're on target.
Okay.
But it's important to note, that plan was done years ago. And even what I know 6 months ago is different from what I know today.
Exactly.
So it was done purposely with a sense of agility in mind. And so I'm actually seeing City Fleet Services accelerating than just sticking to this plan, and that's what it's going to be. For example, like I mentioned, is no SUVs were part of that plan, but City Fleet Services have already rolled out some plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, specifically the Mitsubishi SUVs were kind of first to the market, really good price point, really good replacement for the Tahoe. And they're also already looking into other, larger trucks. There's a lot of grants out there. If anyone's wanting to pilot, whether for heavy duty, medium or light duty, mostly on the heavy and medium, there is a lot of grants out there to test that. Just about every state is rolling out funds from the Volkswagen settlement funds. Those are finally coming to fruition and rolling out. And so you're seeing a lot of fleets, to include our fleets as well, getting budgetary support on some of the more heavy duty vehicles as part of that national program. But there's a lot of state and still national programs out there to electrify a lot of different stuff. And our team is being very proactive there.
And the grant programs, those are available to utilities as well?
Certainly, and for public entity. Now, every state's a little bit different in how they write the rules in VW settlement funds. So I'm just talking about one program. The dollar mark earmarked for Texas, I want to say, was just shy of $200 million for several programs, so pretty significant. But, state of Texas is pretty big. The allotments were based on the number of at that time, cheating Volkswagens in your territory. So California got the biggest amount of allocation. Texas got a pretty big chunk, but some of these smaller states that don't have a lot of natural diesel Volkswagen buyers, didn't get as much as part of that national fund. But there's a lot of stuff out there. We're working with school districts on electrifying their buses and specifically helping them with their application for the latest round of VW funds. So we're pretty excited about what electric buses could mean for our schools and kids. And Cap Metro, their thought is not only do they see today a lower total cost of ownership over a 10-year time frame of electric, the customer experience is so much better. So they're hoping it helps with ridership, where focus groups give the customer experience of riding an electric bus. more akin to a light rail versus a diesel bus. It gets rid of the three biggest complaints on diesel buses. That's noise, that's smell, and it's also kind of heat on the back area, and all those go away. It's also a much smoother ride. And I've talked to some bus drivers who've driven, their whole life gas, and they started driving these first round of electric Cat Metro buses. And just when you talk to them, you get excited about it. They love driving it. I mean, I had one driver say, "Yeah, well, I want to go drive that. I drive a Tesla now." Was his quote, and it's just a better experience for the driver as well.
No, what I want to do is kind of get the pulse of what's going on right now. So a lot has changed in the past 4, maybe 6 weeks. One big element besides the COVID-19 aspect and a lot of shutdowns going on, including the OEMs, fuel prices have plummeted. And in the past, the idea of electrification or the business case for it had traditionally been weighed against whatever the fuel prices were at the time. So if you're looking at $3-4 a gallon of, on petrol fuel, you go, okay, even though I'm paying a higher incremental cost or premium for the EV, I can look at the cost of ownership and go, yeah, I can make a business case. And over the past few years, fuel prices have been relatively stable, maybe somewhere $2-2.50 a gallon, not too high, not super low. EV adoption rate, especially in fleets, has continued to increase. But now that you're looking at the price of fuel dipping, into the mid ones to lower ones, do you anticipate any type of slowdown on that EV adoption rate as it relates to the fuel costs? What is your assessment of what's going on right now?
Well, I think there's a bigger picture is there's going to be a slowdown in a lot of things to include vehicle sales because of the COVID crisis. Specifically on the price pump, those are very short-lived, and OPEC Plus has already made an agreement. And, to their initial point, I truly believe that OPEC Plus feud and where Saudi Arabia was flooding the market with oil to include the reserves wasn't an attack between them and Russia. I personally think it was an attack on U.S. oil interests and other oil interests to get them on board because they were seeing, their controlling their capacity was just leaving a vacuum for other oil interests. So I think from day one, it was an attack on U.S. And other oil interests. So you're already seeing it announced. You're already seeing the administration making comments like, well, the U.S. is going to have to give up something too. Mexico is already talking about. So it was just a very well-timed play. Not too different when Saudi Arabia did it in the early 70s. But from then it was the opposite: is we're not going to give you the oil, and then we had the lines around the corner. This is just a different weapon to flex their economic muscle. And so anyone who's betting long term that the price is going to stay is, I think their head's in the sand a little bit of where it's going to go back to. And when you compare to electric, so electric has for decades been extremely stable at just under $1 to $1 gallon of gas equivalent, energy equivalent, and it just stays flat. And then when you project a line of what gas pump does, it's constantly swinging up and starts swinging up. It's typically around crisis in the Middle East or even a major storm coming through and knocking out some facilitators. So you have the speculator market where the pump fluctuates daily, can fluctuate daily versus the go-to stable electricity. So I think when you look at that was a big part of a grant we did called Central Texas Fuel Independence Project. And it was a collaboration and really about the fuel independence aspects of electricity, because electricity, one, it's super stable. It's arguably the most stable commodity in the world. I don't know of anything more stable over the decades than electricity. And maybe you can prove me wrong on something, but it's just extremely stable, and it's produced locally and here in the U.S. And it's all the supply chain is done, local and regionally, versus relying on these global factors and wars in the Middle East and those kind of things to have that be part of your influence. Also, fuel is just one part of the sliver of a 10-year TCO. Maintenance is a big part of it as well.
Sure.
So even looking at the research from Rocky Mountain Institute on this was sedans for Uber drivers, where they came up with, it was around $5,200 savings. It was almost evenly split between fuel and then just less maintenance, because there's no oil changes and all that kind of stuff. The maintenance regimen for EVs is basically a tire pressure gauge, and you might have a initial check after 100,000 miles just to check the health and things. But it's just a completely different proposition.
Just hitting the pause button real quick on that number of you said it was about a $5,200 savings. Now on that, over what span?
Per year. And so this was their research done. So I want to give credit to the proper research, Rocky Mountain Institute, but they did it specifically in Austin, Texas with Uber.
Okay.
And they did some very deep dive in, well, how much can you save in Austin? And the typical full-time Uber driver or gigabit, this was specifically for Uber, is around $45,000 a year, $50,000 a year is kind of what the wage could be. And so by pocketing an additional $5,200, $5,500 is huge.
Absolutely.
So that is a huge impact. And then, so that's just kind of on, it's a business application, but, it's someone's kind of, being a contractor basically, and being a one person fleet. But a lot of that same methodology is applied to larger fleets and vehicles as well.
Now, the $5,200, how is that relative to the upfront investment on the EV? So in terms of, say, an Uber contractors, they're calculating out how long will it take for me to recoup that investment in these savings. What do you typically look at? I don't know if it was mentioned in that study.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one reason really we're excited to see the used vehicles coming on market. People are getting, 2017 Nissan Leafs for $7,200.
Oh, wow.
With, 15,000 miles. I've even known people who are getting the Fiats as well, for even less than that. So they're starting to become a pretty healthy market of used EVs on the market. But even with new, I mean, everyone's situation is different. I mean, there's people that pin out why a Tesla is much better to be as a Uber driver over the long haul than a Toyota Prius. So, I've seen those numbers as well. I think the cost factor is definitely there. And then I also think, very important is the customer experience as well is much improved. So whether you're bringing passengers around, whether you're in a bus driving passengers around, or you're an Uber driver driving passengers around, or just for your own comfort as a driver itself and whatnot. Because in a lot of ways, you look at why people buy cars, first and foremost is, is it fun and cool? Is it emotionally? And then they kind of figure out the numbers. Now, Fleet's a little different. Fleet is more of the rational buyer and TCO, and they look at those kind of things. Yeah. But at the end of the day, there are people as well, and they're going to be impacted if they're having, especially if you're buying it for yourself. You're a private contractor, because it's also going to be your personal car. So I think the savings definitely pin out, it's just getting better every year. Times on the side, and this little OPEC feint, if you will. Oh, yeah. That's a blip. Anyone who wants to buy in on that one, that think that's going to be like a new norm. Right. I think you're being you're not understanding how the political factors and global markets at play and something like that.
Well, I think it was telling that there was still a large scale move to EVs even before that blip. because gas prices weren't that high historically, and yet, Tesla was still showing big demand. You still had the truck OEMs talking about, between Daimler and Volvo and others, in the larger trucks, talking about the future of trucking as some sort of electrification, whether it's battery electric or, hydrogen fuel cells or something along those lines, that there was still a lot of investment being done in that realm that I'm not sure would be unraveled by a kind of a short-term dip in a volatile basically it's a commodity market there with fuel prices from what I could see.
I agree with that 100%.
Now, what in terms of COVID-19 itself, how has that impacted things? Are you just seeing that as this is a slowdown in buying in general? It doesn't matter what type of vehicle because the OEMs are shut down right now and so forth, or what kind of effects are you going to see or impacts because of COVID-19 right now in the EV market?
Well, one is we're just seeing vehicles, miles traveled. I mean, you just drive around, there's no traffic, at least here in Austin. And so we're also seeing that play out in our electric fueling stations. There's a lot less energy flowing through our 900 public charging ports for people because everyone's parking their cars at home and they're not getting out. So I think one is it's just, I think, a bigger issue, and car sales in general are going to drop. But I think what is the, I would say, the competitive advantage of some of the higher EVs, let's talk about Tesla. No one outsells Tesla in Austin. In Austin, citizens, residents buy about 300 EVs a month. 200 of those are Teslas, if not even more, mostly the three. So you're having dealerships now, due to shelter in place and social days, closing down showroom floors. So there's not a place to go to that traditional business model. You have Tesla, who really has an online market.
Yeah,
people buy and configure online, and it gets delivered. Also, very interesting, a lot of people know Tesla has a 7-day no questions asked return. So if you configure it and buy it, and you don't like it in 5 or 6 days or whatever, you just take it back, and that can alleviate a lot to make sure it just fits within your lifestyle. Yeah. So you're having how their customer experience is geared to be, sure, they have here in Texas, they can't call them dealers, they call them showrooms to work on auto dealership rules. But at the end of the day, they're very comfortable with shipping online versus a lot of the local dealerships. That's not how they want a body in the store. They want to shake your hand. They want to ask you about your kids. It's just a whole different sales approach and experience. So in some ways, I think you'll continue to see I would guess the overall percentage of the, so right now, if you put that number in perspective, Austin, our area buys about 10,000 vehicles a month. So that 300 is what, 3%, right? 3% of sales. I would bet is the number of percent, the overall number may go down, but the overall percent will go up based on the strength of Tesla alone. We might get into 5% sales, 6% sales. And even though it still might be 300 vehicles a month, I think you'll see such a net drop in overall. Maybe we're only selling 5,000 cars here in the Austin area a month versus 10,000 or 7,000. But I think you'll see the percentage of EVs potentially making some gains based on their business model. Also on who their demographic is too.
Okay. Now I'm curious in terms of moving forward as things start, economy starts getting back, it starts opening up sometime. We don't know when. In terms of this idea of things being contactless, meaning less things I touch and so forth, minimizes spread of these types of diseases. Would you imagine that could help drive the expansion of inductive wireless type charging, or is that technology still too expensive to, not quite there, ready for prime time for, for city governments and so forth to start implementing, or private business to start implementing as part of the charging infrastructure?
It's still very early on for mass adoption. We do have an active pilot on inductive charging with a fairly impressive startup that has some good technology. And some of the pros of inductive is, for one, and now their initial wave is chargers that stay in your parking spot. So it's not like you're driving down the road inductive. That's future phases.
Sure.
But so when you pull in, you just pull over a pad, and then you also have to have the equipment on the vehicle. Now, long term, as this gets adopted, it's just almost like phones. There's a market for people to plug in their phones, and more people. I personally now have a wireless. Once you get used to that little thing you put it on, you think, oh man, I don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
Part of the advantages of inductive, one is the rate of flow is pretty close to the same as a typical level 2, right around 6 kW. So you don't really get much of a loss there, which is good.
Yeah.
And the overall, according to this, so the company is Hevo, is the one that is we're working with on doing these pilots and demonstrations in Austin.
HEVO?
HEVO, as in Victor.
Gotcha.
And it was started by a couple Iraqi war veterans, just real gung-ho. And I remember when we first talked to them a few years ago, I'm like, man, good luck. Well, this is going to be so hard for them to pull out because it is very technical and whatnot. So, we talked to a lot of aspiring startup CEOs through our work with the Austin Technology Incubator and other organizations here in Austin. And I remember when I first talked to these guys, I'm like, oh man, this has like a 1 in 100 chance. But they have the patents, they have the UL listing, they have the technology, they have the supply chain. So they've really been just an impressive leadership team to kind of bring this to fruition.
Sure.
One is, so to answer your question, I feel like I talked at a tangent, is yes, but not right now. In a lot of ways, it's really not needed in that 85% of all charging today, at least here in Austin, and pretty much those are the national numbers, 85%, it all happens at home. So people aren't worried about their home when they pull in the garage and they have the spout there. Yeah. If you ever look at a study with how dirty gas handles are, it's disgusting. I mean, that is a great way to spread all kinds of nastiness. It's one of the most nasty things people touch in their lives is if they fuel at a gas pump, with the amount of volume and everything else going on in there. And so the majority of people now, instead of having this gas station public nozzle or model that they go to, they just treat their EV like their phone. They go home, they plug it in, or in some cases, you drive over your mat and it's inductive charging. You go to sleep, you wake up, and it's there. They don't even think about how long it takes to charge or any of that. So that's the dominant business case today.
Okay.
Now, 15% of the charging happens on the public charging. We're interested in this technology. We're interested in wireless for fleets. And at some point, we think it's a very promising technology for autonomous electric vehicles. Yeah. So that is part of the Austin, as an enabler. Yeah. Definitely as a way to help reduce costs as well. And in between fueling, not always having to go back to home station and a person actually plugging you in, et cetera. So I think it's very promising, but it's pretty early on.
Now, if you were to estimate about how much more expensive the inductive is versus right now the current kind of level 2 plug-in type of charging systems, what is the price disparity or gap that
it's not that it's surprisingly that not that much different, with a major caveat.
Okay.
If this becomes the new normal, it is according to Hevo significantly cheaper just to install one of these inductive charging units in a vehicle than to do the level 2 J1772 two. Why am I having a blank on that connection with the components? So they're already saying, once it starts getting market acceptance and becomes a new normal, it's not that much to upgrade the car, or at some point it could even be a car cost deduction if you only had inductive versus only having plug-in. So, there's some nuances there. And so that, that needs to, be at a pretty mature state at that point.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember the cost. I don't know what their MSRP is. As part of our pilot, we have a whole different pricing schedule.
Absolutely.
So the short answer
if there was a
percentage,
like if it was a 10% difference or a 15, 20, or if it was, a 50, 60%. So they're still a long way, but I didn't know
I don't want to guess on the cost, because I don't know it off the top of my head of what the retail rollout, but it's still not readily available, frankly.
Yeah. So from your perspective, we'd be looking 2, 3, 5 years or longer out before that.
3 to 5. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Anything that we haven't talked about today in terms of the state of the EV market that you think would be important for our audience to be thinking about?
I think the number one impactful thing that's coming to the market is trucks and SUVs.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the EV market is competing for about 33% of the U.S. total sales. So you're fighting for a slice of the pie. Mm-hmm. Until you have trucks and SUVs as part of the EV arsenal, you'll always be, fighting for a slice of pie versus, for the whole pie. And maybe that's too much pie analogy. So that's what I'm most excited about. So part of, of the COVID crisis, no one wants to launch a new vehicle during these times. So Rivian, who I'm very excited, I think they'll be a very competitive, very desirable vehicle. I've seen it in person. It is gorgeous. The price point is good. The specifications are good. The marketing is good. I think they have a top-notch team. I've talked to a lot of the Rivian folks there. And so their truck and SUV, I think, can make a bigger splash than even the Model 3 did in our territory, which has been such a dominant player in here, especially in Texas. We like our trucks and SUVs.
Yeah.
The Ford
utility fleets do as well. That's the holy grail of their electrification portfolio. So.
Yeah, and so Ford announcing, that they're coming out where Rivian is targeting the adventure segment, the enthusiasts. I think they're also doing some interesting product placement with season 3 of Long Way Around, which is kind of interesting. Ford F-150, you notice their Super Bowl ads or their advertisement is around, look how much this thing can haul. What a work truck it is. And they literally get some construction working dudes all like hype, wow, and then their minds are blown. So you know what they're targeting. And, no one outsells the F-150. And so if Ford is serious on it, and so we're already seeing some, they're already to the point where they have some certified upfitters if you want to, try out the technology now. But I think that's really big. So out of everything we discussed, I think nothing beats having the trucks and SUVs come to the market, and hopefully those continue to come as close to as planned as possible. We're already starting to see some delays, but I think that will be huge. I personally like the Cybertruck. It's a little divisive. I kind of want one, but it's kind of one of those people either kind of love them or hate them. I'm in the love them category, but even that is going to have its niche as well and have its place. You're going to have a lot of people who will start buying, especially the current Tesla owners. I could see them getting a second, being a 2 Tesla, moving to that with the truck as their second one, or even the Y on the SUV coming out. So a lot of interesting products coming to market.
Awesome. Well, Karl, I appreciate you taking time out today. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode of Fleet Convos. We'll see you next time.